A single dad woke up in the darkness and froze. A woman was lying beside him on his thin mattress, a complete stranger, bruised, bleeding, trembling. He'd never seen her before in his life. But what he didn't know was that this woman wasn't just running from danger, she was a billionaire CEO, and some dangerous people were after her. And by letting her stay, he'd just put himself and his 7-year-old daughter in the crosshairs of people who'd kill to get what they wanted. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Daniel Brooks' heart hammered against his ribs as his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the torn curtains. His hand flew to his chest, and that's when the full reality hit him. This wasn't a nightmare. There was actually a woman in his bed. He scrambled backward so fast he nearly fell, off the mattress, his voice coming out in a strangled gasp. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The woman jerked upright at the same moment, her eyes wide with terror, her body trembling as she raised both hands in front of her like a shield. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Please, just listen. I can explain. I didn't mean to scare you." Daniel's mind raced. His daughter, Emma. She was asleep in the next room. His pulse thundered in his ears as he glanced toward the doorway, then back at the stranger in his bed. The woman looked like she'd been through hell. Her expensive-looking blouse was torn at the shoulder, mud caked on her knees, and a thin line of dried blood ran from the corner of her lip. But it was her eyes that stopped him from yelling again, sharp, haunted, and filled with a fear so raw it made his own panic pause. "You thought this place was empty?" Daniel's voice was lower now, but still edged with disbelief. "Lady, I don't know who you are or what kind of trouble you're in, but you need to start talking. Right now." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "If I tell you the truth, you might throw me out, or worse, you might get hurt." Daniel stared at her. He should be calling the police. He should be grabbing Emma and running. But something in the way this woman trembled, in the way she looked at him like he was the only thing standing between her and whatever nightmare she'd escaped from it, made him hesitate. He grabbed the worn blanket from the foot of the bed and tossed it to her. "Start slow," he said. "Who are you?" Before she could answer, Daniel's mind flashed to his own life, the one he'd been living just hours ago before waking up to this madness. 34 years old, working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, 16-hour shifts repairing elevators in buildings nicer than any place he'd ever live. Coming home to Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, who was too young to understand why they ate ramen 5 nights a week, or why her shoes had holes in them. He slept on the floor most nights so she could have the bed. This apartment in the poorest part of the city was all he could afford after his wife died 2 years ago. But every night, no matter how exhausted he was, he'd tuck Emma in and whisper the same words. "We're broke, but we don't break." Now, sitting across from this terrified stranger, Daniel felt that philosophy being tested in ways he'd never imagined. The woman pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "My name is Cassandra Vale." Daniel's eyes widened. Even in his world of grease-stained uniforms and overdue bills, that name carried weight. Cassandra Vale, CEO of Vale Dynamics, one of the largest tech companies in the state. He'd seen her face on billboards downtown, on magazine covers, in the grocery store checkout line, always polished, always powerful, always untouchable. And now she was here, in his apartment, looking more broken than anyone he'd ever seen. "Why would someone like you be in my apartment?" Daniel asked, his voice barely steady. Cassandra's jaw tightened. She looked toward the grimy window, then back at him, and when she spoke, her words came out in a rush. "Because last night, someone tried to kill me." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Daniel felt his blood turn cold. "They want my father's company," she continued, her voice breaking. "They want me gone, and they know where I live. They know every place I go. Every security detail I have. I couldn't go to my penthouse. I couldn't go to my office. I ditched my car, threw away my phone, ran through alleys until my feet bled." Her eyes locked onto his, desperate and pleading. "Your building was dark. No lights, no cars outside. I thought it was abandoned. I thought it was empty. I had nowhere else to run." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a sound shattered the fragile quiet of the room. Knock, 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 hard, deliberate, angry. Cassandra's face drained of all color. She grabbed Daniel's wrist, her nails digging into his skin. "Please don't open it," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly he could barely understand her. "Please." Daniel's heart pounded as he stood slowly, his mind racing. Emma. He had to protect Emma. He moved silently to her room, gently shaking her awake and pressing a finger to his lips. "Baby, I need you to hide in the closet. Stay quiet and be brave, okay? Just like we practiced." Emma's eyes were wide, but she nodded and crawled into the closet without a word. Daniel closed the door softly, then returned to the main room where Cassandra sat frozen on the bed, her entire body trembling. The knock came again. Louder this time. The door handle jiggled violently. Daniel stood perfectly still, barely breathing. Cassandra had her. Hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, finally, heavy footsteps moved away from the door, down the hallway, fading into silence. Daniel exhaled slowly, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. Cassandra collapsed forward, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "They're looking for you," Daniel said quietly. "They're not giving up." She nodded, unable to speak. Daniel sat down on the floor across from her, running his hands through his hair. He should be terrified. He should be furious. But all he felt was a deep, aching compassion for this woman who'd stumbled into his life with nowhere left to go. "Tell me everything," he said gently, "from the beginning." And so she did. Cassandra's voice was raw as she explained how her father, the founder of Veil Dynamics, had died 6 months ago. He'd left the entire company to her, not to the board, not to the investors, but to his daughter. The board members had been furious. Some investors wanted the company sold off for billions. Cassandra refused. She wanted to honor her father's vision, to keep the company independent, to protect the employees who depended on it. "Someone inside the corporation hired mercenaries," she said, her voice hollow, "to remove me. They cornered me in the parking garage last night. I barely got away. I ran all night, ditching my car, losing everything. I fell, climbing a fence, and hit my face on the pavement. I bled, I cried, and I kept running until I ended up here." She looked at Daniel with broken eyes. "I didn't come here to hide. I came here to disappear, because I didn't think anyone cared if I lived." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. Despite being dirt poor, despite being exhausted, despite the danger that had just knocked on his door, he couldn't turn away from her pain. He stood and walked to the tiny kitchen, putting a battered kettle on the stove. When the water boiled, he made her tea in a chipped mug and handed it to her, along with his only clean shirt. "You're safe here," he said simply, "at least for now." Cassandra stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Daniel sat down beside her, his voice quiet but steady. "You looked scared. Everyone deserves help when they're scared." Before Cassandra could respond, the closet door creaked open. Emma peeked out, her small face filled with concern. She tiptoed over to Cassandra and held out her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing eye and the worn ear. "Mommy used to say hugs, help," Emma said softly. Cassandra took the rabbit with shaking hands, and then she did something Daniel hadn't expected. She pulled Emma into her arms and sobbed deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear through years of loneliness and fear. Emma patted her back gently, the way children do when they understand pain, even if they don't. Understand the reasons behind it. Daniel watched them, his throat tight, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt purpose. He felt needed. And despite the danger lurking just outside his door, despite the impossibility of the situation, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt this woman. Not on his watch. The sun rose over the city, but inside Daniel's apartment, the curtains stayed drawn. Cassandra sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the mug of tea that had long gone cold. Emma was coloring quietly on the floor, occasionally glancing up at the strange woman who'd appeared in their lives like a ghost from another world. Daniel paced near the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain as he watched the street below. A black sedan had been parked across the street for the last hour. No one had gotten out. No one had moved. But it was there, watching, waiting. "They're not leaving," Daniel said quietly. Cassandra looked up, her face pale. "They won't. Not until they find me." "How many people are we talking about?" "I don't know," she admitted. "The board has resources, money, connections. They could have hired anyone. A dozen men, more. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come here. I've put you and Emma in danger. Daniel turned from the window, his jaw set. You didn't put us in danger. They did. And right now, you're staying put until we figure this out. Cassandra blinked, surprised by the firmness in his voice. She wasn't used to people protecting her. Her whole life had been about being strong, being in control, being the one who made the decisions. But here, in this tiny apartment that smelled like old coffee and worn furniture, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Tell me about them, Daniel said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. The people who want you dead. Who are they? Cassandra took a shaky breath. There are 3 board members leading this. Gerald Hastings, he was my father's business partner 30 years ago. He thinks he deserves the company more than I do. Then there's Patricia Lawn, head of investments. She's been pushing to sell Veil Dynamics to a Chinese tech firm for $8 billion. And Marcus Reeves, the CFO. He's the one who probably hired the mercenaries. He has connections to private military contractors. Daniel whistled low. That's a lot of power working against you. My father knew they were snakes, Cassandra said bitterly. That's why he left everything to me in his will. He wanted to make sure the company stayed independent, but I underestimated how far they'd go. She looked down at her hands. I thought corporate backstabbing was just rumors and hostile takeovers. I didn't think they'd actually try to kill me. Did you go to the police? I tried. I filed a report 2 weeks ago when I started getting threats. They said they'd look into it, but nothing happened. I think someone paid them off, or scared them off. She laughed bitterly. When you have that much money and influence, the rules don't apply. Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing everything. This was so far beyond his world it felt like a movie. But it wasn't a movie. It was real. And sitting across from him was a woman who'd been hunted through the streets like an animal. What about your security team? He asked. The people who are supposed to protect you. Cassandra's expression darkened. Someone on the inside betrayed me. That's how they knew where I'd be last night. My head of security, James, was supposed to drive me home from the office. Instead, he drove me straight into an ambush. 4 men with guns were waiting in the garage. James got out of the car and walked away. Her voice cracked. I trusted him for 3 years. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest. So you ran? I ran, she confirmed. I crashed through a side door, climbed a fence, tore my clothes, fell on my face, and just kept running. I didn't stop until I couldn't run anymore. And then I saw your building. Dark, quiet, forgotten. She met his eyes. I thought I could hide here for a few hours, maybe rest, figure out my next move. I didn't expect to fall asleep, and I definitely didn't expect to wake up next to someone. Despite everything, Daniel almost smiled. Yeah, that makes 2 of us. For a moment, the tension eased. Then Emma looked up from her coloring. Are the bad people going to hurt us? She asked, her voice small. Daniel's heart clenched. He knelt beside his daughter and pulled her close. No, baby, I won't let that happen. I promise. Emma looked at Cassandra. Are they trying to hurt you because you're pretty? Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. No, sweetheart. They're trying to hurt me because I won't give them what they want. That's not fair, Emma said firmly. No, Cassandra agreed. It's not. The next 2 days blurred, together in a haze of fear and strange intimacy. Daniel couldn't go to work, he called in sick, knowing it might cost him his job but unable to leave Cassandra and Emma alone. They stayed inside, keeping the lights low, speaking in whispers. Every footstep in the hallway made them freeze. Every car door slamming outside sent Cassandra's hand to her chest. But in between the terror, something unexpected happened. They talked. Late at night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel and Cassandra sat on the floor with their backs against the wall, sharing stories in the darkness. I met my wife at a diner, Daniel said softly. I was 24, broke, working 2 jobs and barely keeping my head above water. She was a waitress, prettiest smile I'd ever seen. She brought me coffee and extra fries, even though I couldn't afford to tip much. He smiled at the memory. We got married a year later, had Emma 2 years after that. And then, his voice trailed off. What happened? Cassandra asked gently. Cancer, Daniel said. Aggressive. By the time they caught it, it was too late. She fought for 8 months. Died on a Tuesday morning while I was holding her hand. He wiped his eyes roughly. Emma was 5. She barely remembers her mother now. And that kills me more than anything. Cassandra reached out and took his hand. I'm sorry. What about you? Daniel asked. What was your childhood like? Cassandra was quiet for a long moment. Lonely. My mother left when I was 6, just packed her bags one day and never came back. My father threw himself into his work, built Veil Dynamics from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, but he was never warm, never affectionate. I grew up in a mansion with 30 rooms and no one to talk to. She looked at Daniel. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. Is that why you won't sell the company? Daniel asked. Because it's all you have left of him? Partly, Cassandra admitted, but also because it's the right thing to do. Veil Dynamics employs 15,000 people. If we sell to that Chinese firm, they'll gut the company, fire half the staff, and strip it for parts. My father built something good. I won't let them destroy it for profit. Daniel squeezed her hand. You're braver than you think. Cassandra laughed, but it was a broken sound. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. I've never been this scared in my life. Fear doesn't mean you're not brave, Daniel said. It just means you're human. She looked at him in the darkness, and something shifted between them, something neither of them had words for yet. I feel safer here, Cassandra whispered, than I ever did in my mansion. Daniel felt his heart skip. Cassandra. Before he could finish, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. Daniel moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. His blood ran cold. 3 men stood at the building's entrance. One of them spoke into a radio. Another checked a piece of paper, probably a list of apartments. They're here, Daniel breathed. Cassandra's face went white. We need to run. Now. Where? They're watching every exit. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Daniel could hear them on his floor now. Cassandra grabbed Emma, who'd woken at the noise, and held her close. Daddy, Emma whispered, terrified. Daniel's mind raced. They were trapped. No back exit, no fire escape, just one door and a 3rd-floor window. He looked around desperately and saw the wrench he used for work sitting on the counter. He grabbed it. Stay behind me, he said. The footsteps stopped outside his door. A shadow fell across the gap beneath it. Then, a voice. Cassandra Veil, we know you're in there. Come out, and no one gets hurt. Daniel's grip tightened on the wrench. Cassandra shook her head frantically, holding Emma tighter. We're not leaving, the voice continued. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Daniel's heart pounded. He looked at Cassandra, at Emma, at the thin door that was all that stood between them and trained killers. He thought about his wife, about the promise he'd made to protect Emma no matter what, about this broken woman who'd stumbled into his life asking for help. He'd spent his whole life feeling powerless, too poor, too small, too invisible to matter. Not anymore. Get in the bathroom, Daniel whispered to Cassandra. Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Daniel, no. Go. Now. Cassandra hesitated, then pulled Emma toward the tiny bathroom. The door closed softly. Locked. Daniel stood alone in the main room, wrench in hand, as the door began to splinter. They were coming in. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to Soul Story for more emotional tales that touch the heart. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were in Daniel's situation. Would you have helped Cassandra, or would fear have made you turn her away? Let us know. Now, let's continue. The door exploded inward with a deafening crack. Splinters of wood flew across the room as 2 men burst through, dressed in black tactical gear, their faces hard and emotionless. The 3rd man stayed in the hallway, watching. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He swung the wrench with everything he had, catching the 1st man across the shoulder. The man grunted and stumbled back, but the 2nd one was already on Daniel, grabbing his wrist and twisting. Pain shot up Daniel's arm, but he refused to let go. He kicked out, connecting with the man's knee. The man cursed and loosened his grip just enough for Daniel to wrench free. Where is she? The 1st man growled, recovering quickly. Not here, Daniel spat, backing toward the bathroom door. The man smiled coldly. Wrong answer. They came at him together. Daniel fought like a man possessed, swinging the wrench, throwing punches, using every ounce of strength his exhausted body could muster. He took a hit to the ribs that knocked the wind out of him, another to the jaw that split his lip. But he kept fighting. For Emma, for Cassandra, For the first time in his life, he was fighting for something that mattered more than survival. One of the men grabbed him from behind, locking his arms. Daniel thrashed, but the grip was iron tight. The other man approached the bathroom door, reaching for the handle. "No!" Daniel roared. And then everything changed. Sirens. Loud. Close. Getting closer. The men froze. The one holding Daniel cursed viciously. Blue and red lights flickered through the window, painting the walls in flashes of color. "We're out!" the third man called from the hallway. "Now!" They released Daniel and bolted, their footsteps thundering down the stairs. Daniel collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, blood dripping from his split lip. The sirens grew deafening, and then he heard voices, authoritative, commanding, "FBI, everyone stay where you are." The bathroom door flew open. Cassandra rushed out, Emma still in her arms, and dropped to her knees beside Daniel. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Her hands hovered over his face, his bleeding arm, not sure where to touch without causing more pain. "I'm fine," Daniel managed, though his ribs screamed in protest. "How did they—" "I sent a signal," Cassandra said, tears streaming down her face. "Last night while you were asleep, I used your neighbor's Wi-Fi. I pinged my location to my assistant, the only person I still trust. I told her to contact the FBI if she didn't hear from me in 48 hours. She sobbed. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I was afraid they'd intercept it, afraid it wouldn't work. But it did. They came." Heavy boots pounded up the stairs. Federal agents flooded the hallway, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Daniel barely registered what was happening, his vision blurred. Emma was crying. Cassandra was holding his face, saying his name over and over. "Sir, we need medical," someone shouted. The next few hours passed in a chaotic blur. Paramedics patched up Daniel's wounds, a gash on his arm that needed stitches, bruised ribs, cuts, and contusions. Emma clung to him the entire time, refusing to let go. Cassandra gave her statement to the FBI agents, her voice steady now, the CEO returning as the immediate danger faded. The agents confirmed what Cassandra had suspected. 3 board members had orchestrated the hit. Gerald Hastings, Patricia Lawn, and Marcus Reeves had all been arrested within the hour. The mercenaries they'd hired were being tracked down. Phone records, financial transactions, security footage from the parking garage. The FBI had everything they needed. "You're safe now, Miss Vale," the lead agent said. "We have more than enough evidence to put them away for a very long time." Cassandra nodded, but her eyes kept drifting back to Daniel, who sat on the couch with Emma curled against his chest. When the agents finally left and the apartment grew quiet again, Cassandra stood in the middle of the destroyed room, the broken door, the overturned furniture, the blood on the floor, and felt the weight of everything crash over her. "I almost got you killed," she whispered. Daniel looked up at her. "But you didn't." "Emma could have, but she didn't," Daniel said firmly. "We're okay, all of us." Cassandra sank down onto the couch beside them. Emma reached out and took her hand. "You can stay with us," Emma said simply. "Daddy says everyone needs help sometimes." Cassandra's composure finally shattered. She buried her face in her hands and wept for the terror of the last 3 days, for the loneliness of the last 3 decades, for the unexpected kindness of a man who had every reason to turn her away and didn't. Daniel wrapped his free arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. The 3 of them sat like that, bruised and exhausted and alive, until the sun began to set outside the broken window. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in front of his apartment building, watching a sleek black car pull up to the curb. It looked absurdly out of place in this neighborhood. The back door opened, and Cassandra stepped out. She looked different, put together again. Her hair was styled, her clothes expensive, her posture confident. But when she saw Daniel, her face softened into something vulnerable and real. She walked toward him carrying a bouquet of flowers in one hand and Emma's worn stuffed rabbit in the other. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Daniel replied. They stood there for a moment, the gap between their worlds suddenly feeling very wide. "I wanted to thank you," Cassandra said, "for everything, how you fought them, how you protected Emma and me even when you knew you were outmatched." Her voice broke. "You could have died." "So could you," Daniel said quietly. "That's why I couldn't just do nothing." Cassandra looked down at the flowers in her hand. "I went back to Veil Dynamics, took control of the company. The board is completely restructured now. New people, good people, people I can trust." She met his eyes. "But every meeting, every decision, Every moment I'm sitting in that office, I keep thinking about this place, about you and Emma, about how I felt more like myself in 3 days here than I have in 34 years. Daniel's heart stuttered. Cassandra, I know our worlds are different, she continued quickly. I know I'm a CEO and you're a single dad working 3 jobs. I know this doesn't make sense on paper. But Daniel, she stepped closer, you didn't just help me escape. You reminded me what it feels like to be human, to be seen, to be cared for without conditions or expectations. The apartment door behind Daniel opened, and Emma came running out, squealing with delight when she saw Cassandra. You came back. Cassandra knelt down and handed Emma the stuffed rabbit. I told you I'd return him. He kept me safe these last few weeks. Emma hugged the rabbit, then hugged Cassandra just as tightly. Cassandra looked up at Daniel, still kneeling on the sidewalk with his daughter in her arms. Can I be in your life? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Both of your lives? I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how we make this work, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Daniel felt his throat tighten. For 3 weeks, he'd told himself it was over, that Cassandra would return to her world and he'd return to his, and that would be that. He'd convinced himself it was better that way, safer, more realistic. But looking at her now, this brilliant, broken, brave woman who'd stumbled into his life and changed everything, he realized he didn't want safe or realistic. He wanted her. What happens now? Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Cassandra stood, taking his hand in hers. Her grip was warm and steady and real. Now? She said, a small smile breaking through. I rebuild my company. And you, her eyes shimmered with tears, you rebuild my heart. Daniel stared at her, speechless. All his life, he'd believed he was too small, too poor, too ordinary to matter. But this woman, this incredible woman, was looking at him like he was the most important person in the world. I don't have much to offer, he said honestly. I'm broke. I live in a tiny apartment with a broken door. I work jobs that barely pay the bills. You have everything that matters, Cassandra said firmly. You have kindness, courage, love. You have Emma, and if you'll have me, her voice cracked, I'd like to be part of that. I'd like to learn what family feels like. Real family. Emma tugged on Cassandra's sleeve. Does that mean you're going to stay? Cassandra looked at Daniel, waiting for his answer. He thought about everything they'd been through, the fear, the danger, the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. He thought about how she'd cried in his arms, how she'd held his daughter, how she'd fought to stay alive because she'd found something worth living for. He thought about his wife's words, spoken years ago on her deathbed. Don't close your heart, Daniel. Promise me. When love finds you again, don't be afraid. He wasn't afraid anymore. Yeah, Daniel said, pulling Cassandra close. You can stay. Cassandra's face broke into a radiant smile. She kissed him softly, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt bright. Emma cheered and wrapped her arms around both of them. Can we have pancakes now? She asked. Daniel and Cassandra laughed, the sound echoing through the shabby street like music. Pancakes sound perfect, Cassandra said. They walked back into the apartment together, the CEO, the single dad, and the little girl who'd brought them together with a stuffed rabbit and a gentle heart. The door was still broken, the furniture still worn, the neighborhood still forgotten by the rest of the world, but inside that tiny space, something new was beginning, something real and precious and worth fighting for. A family, built not from blood or money or circumstance, but from fear transformed into courage, loneliness transformed into connection, and 2 broken hearts learning to beat as one. And as they sat around Daniel's small kitchen table, eating pancakes and laughing and planning a future none of them could have imagined 3 weeks ago, one thing was abundantly clear. Love didn't care about bank accounts or social status or the distance between their worlds. Love just cared about showing up, about being brave, about choosing each other again and again, no matter what came next, and that was exactly what they intended to do. Thank you so much for watching this story on Soul Story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of love, courage, and redemption. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. We read every single one. Until next time, remember, kindness can change everything.